I'm super excited. All right, let's get started.
Cool. So I guess I can kick us off. I know Steve and I talked a little bit about if we wanted to do introductions or not, but I actually think this is a pretty good size to do that. Steven, do you agree? You might be able to get away.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So we do have some slides, but we promise that half of them are just like really cool diagrams and the other half are questions for you guys. We do have some content, but we're really hoping to get as much from you guys as possible. So let's kick off with introductions and then we can get right in. My name is Sanjana. I'm on the professional services team here at Fishtown. I'm an analytics engineer. What that means is that I work with clients to do like mostly DBT-centered data analytics consulting, though I do spend some time, a lot of my time in warehouses and sometimes in BI tools. I think what's really great about Steven and I hosting this meetup is that we both think about like governance and compliance from like such vastly different angles. The thing that I have experience with is just like designing the solution for clients, given the limitations, given their policies, given the frameworks that they've given to us. But yeah, super excited to learn more. And I'm really excited that somebody on my team is here too. And I think she'll be a great resource for us. I won't embarrass her anymore. Over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, so my name is Stephen Bailey. I'm the Director of Applied Data Science at Immuta. And Immuta is a software company that has basically a database access control layer. And we implement access controls using policies and attributes. And we really think a lot. My background is really in data science and doing biomedical image analysis and stuff like that. So coming into this product sector where we're actually thinking about governance from a very principled way, thinking about how does your access controls and data transformations align with legal policies and the changing regulations that are coming out has been really fun to think about. It's a very interesting problem of I've got all this data that's sensitive or not sensitive over here. I've got all these people over here. We've got these laws over here. And how do we like map them in such a way that you don't just want to like throw yourself off a cliff as a data manager, but you actually are able to kind of find that right balance between protecting privacy, protecting data, and also granting access to it. So I think the one thing I've learned in 2 years of working in this role is there's no right answer, but there are, it's better to have an approach, a principled approach than no approach. And so, I think I'm really excited to just chat through this and talk with everybody today. Hear what insights you guys have. Should we just, do you want to go around the horn real quick, Sanjana?
Yeah, I'm happy. Maybe we just do like name, position, company.
Yeah, and maybe I can just call out people as I see them on my screen, if that sounds all right. Caitlin, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I'm Caitlin. I am one of the admins at Locally Optimistic and also lead the data team at Trove Recommerce. We're a resale platform that helps large brands take back products from their customers and resell it.
Awesome. Avi?
Hi, I'm Avi. I'm an engineer kind of working across the whole analytics stack, whatever job title that is, I don't really know. But I work at a company called Drops. We sell eco-friendly, sustainable laundry cleaning products online, mostly subscriptions.
Awesome. And then I've got someone else on my team, Colin. You want to introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, my name's Colin. I'm a data scientist at Immuta, and Steven's my manager. This is my first locally optimistic office hour, so I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Amy?
This is also my first one. I'm excited. I'm Amy. I'm a solutions architect at Fishtown. I was previously an analytics engineer, but all the fun now.
Steven?
Hi, Stephen Capelletti. I'm the data analyst at TPublic. I say the intentionally. I'm the only data analyst, so and we have one data engineer, so I do all the things data at TPublic. TPublic is a platform that helps turn designers' passion into profit. So they upload designs, and we help them get them printed on pretty much anything you want, and then get them out to customers and so on and so forth. So thanks.
Oh, awesome. Dylan?
Yeah, I'm Dylan Gregerson. I'm a senior data scientist at Vertigris that is trying to sustain human life by making buildings more energy efficient. So we have sensors and AI that are working on building energy efficiency.
Awesome. And then another person on my team, James.
I'm James. I'm an analytics engineer at Immuta on Steven's team.
Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm a data analyst at a company called 750. We're a software company in the beverage alcohol industry.
Matt?
Hey everyone, I'm Matt. I work at Curai. We're a telehealth startup powered by AI. I lead our data platform and our security and privacy program. So I'm very excited about this topic, given that we're going through a enterprise go-to-market. So we're currently trying to pass a SOC 2 and eventually become HIPAA compliant.
Oh, outstanding. We might save some time for you at the end.
Oh, great.
or immediately. John? Might be away from the computer. Andrew?
Hi, my name is Andrew. I'm a data architect at a company called BD, or Becton Dickinson. So we're a medical technology company.
Awesome. Cyrus?
Hi, we're doing intros. I just joined, sorry.
Yeah, we're just doing some intros. Just name, where you work, what you do.
Okay, sorry. I'm Cyrus. I work at a company called Ocado in the UK, and I head up a data department.
Awesome. And then just a couple more. Colton? How about Michael?
Howdy, y'all. Michael here, also from Locally Optimistic. I'm sort of doing some things and just listening in, but excited to learn.
Awesome. So I think that covers everyone on my screen. Anyone we missed? Awesome. Sanjana, you want to?
Cool. So, the way that Stephen and I, honestly, mostly Stephen, thought about the content here is just like identifying the 3 kinds of challenges that we know and have experienced when it comes to governance and compliance. So we'll go topic by topic. And the first thing I think we want to chat about is systems. So I think Stephen's going to give us a little bit of a download there, and then I can moderate the discussion that follows on each of these things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think wanted to break apart the conversation a little bit, because I think sometimes I tend to get into like solution mode around, especially around systems and like thinking about metadata management or specific access controls. But I think there's a lot of layers that are really interesting to unpack. And so the first one, I don't know how many of you have seen this diagram from Andreessen Horowitz's website. They recently published this sort of massive infrastructure architecture diagram. And really what I want to highlight is like, there's this real broad suite of tools and tooling types in the data ecosystem, starting with, on the left-hand side, you have sources, and then you have ingestion and transformation. You've got specific storage technologies, and you have query and processing tools that do historical querying, predictive querying, and then we actually have all the data products that are the result of all this processing. And when you think about managing, especially, I can't remember who it was, but they said that they're the data person. it's like you do oftentimes, even if you're just the one data person, you have to have these different tools and these different components in your pipeline in order to get something done in a way that's going to scale in the future. But it introduces a lot of places where things can go wrong, or where if you have sensitive data, where data can leak out. And so they, in this diagram, they do point out 4 areas that I think fall pretty much, like, I think they're pretty comprehensive, areas in the governance space that might, that we could talk about maybe how people implement, but they are metadata management, quality and testing, entitlements and security, and then observability. And so we have a couple questions just to unpack on this, but really wanted to get people's thoughts on, at your organization and your workflow, what are your primary governance concerns, and what tooling do you have in place? What are your challenges when it comes to managing your different systems? And have you found any best practices?
You want us to jump in and comment?
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, so I can give a little context of where Kira is at. So we've been around for about 3 years. We originally built a consumer healthcare product, and so we're like positioned ourselves as like HIPAA enabled, but not HIPAA compliant. We're now pursuing an enterprise go-to-market, and so we likely will cross the HIPAA threshold and also need to pass a SOC 2 audit. And so we're working with a security assurance provider right now, Tugboat Logic, to help us figure out our controls. And so right now, like, we have a data warehouse, and up until now, we've had policies governing who can access it under what circumstances, but no formal access controls. And so, like, the one concrete thing I'm trying to figure out is like, all right, like, how do I integrate DBT with an access control scheme? How do I enable our like first data hire, who's soon going to be our 3 data team members, to develop the data warehouse? Like, do I give them access to PAI? Do I create a separate data pipeline or data pipeline step before DBT to handle the permissioning? So that's like a big question, just in terms of getting that foundational set of controls in place. And then, there's a bunch of longer lead stuff around how do we like improve the excellence of the program. But I think that's more like a Q3 or a Q4 question for us, given that we're just trying to do the basic work we need to start closing deals early to mid next year.
Yeah, my previous company, I was at Team, and we did workplace optimization, we had workplace technology, and we went through a SOC compliance journey. It took like 2 years for us. It's just like, one of the things we found was like, how do you make iterable progress? There's a few people on the team that really wanted to just like jump all in and not. So like making iterable progress towards the SOC compliance and through the SOC journey. And then we also ran into some interesting things with data versus software. So the software side of it, there's these very clear, like, they try to make dividing lines between people who have read access and who have write access, for like, and especially with SOC, trying to get so that people that are committing code can't execute that code, can't like run that code. And it was very different for data, because the thing that we were working on was the data. Like, I can't develop my thing with a stage environment very effectively, because the stage environment, like, the data is the thing. And so it was very hard to like separate those out. We were trying to, make it so, like, there was an awkward period where we're like, oh yeah, okay, so our engineers are the only one that can write automated tests, and they can't access the main data, and the analysts can access the main data. And so like to debug things, like all of a sudden we had 2 people involved, where it really made no sense. And so it was, like, that was hard to figure out where the dividing line is for data.
That's super interesting. And how did you come to your ultimate decisions? Like, what sort of guidance did you receive from folks or from auditors, or like, how do you even build that process out?
Yeah, we didn't end up getting auditors' opinions too much. I wasn't directly involved. It came down to just processes. Can we show who made the changes? And a lot of the initial SOC stuff is kind of just that. Like, make sure you have an audit trail of every change that happens and everywhere that touches it. And you know, some of it came down to processy. Like, there weren't automated system checks. It was like, all right, I put into a ticket that I committed, you know, this SQL to the database and changed a field or changed a table. And we had, you know, we put in steps that you had like peer review, and that was all tracked. So we had essentially the audit trail that made sure that somebody else has looked at your code, somebody else is committing it. So we actually had a little bit of those checks, but you know, all of the team was small, and data is sort of the core part. So everybody did have access to edit and to read. And that was like later in the SOC journey, like that, I think we were able to get over the first SOC hurdle, but like later in the SOC journey, they really want access totally separated out. And I don't think we had a good solution.
And was this something that your audit? So the thing we've heard from the assurance team we're working with is that, you know, we have to come up with a set of policies, but really what they care about for the SOC 2, at least for the type 1, is more the evidence that we're implementing our stated controls. So for us, the way we've interpreted it so far, and we're still early days, is that it's more of a best effort thing. Where as long as I don't give like literally my whole engineering team access to the PII, and I have some sort of auditing around PII access, that's sufficient for passing the SOC. I think the place where we have seen open questions is around, so we're in healthcare, and so we're selling to insurance, and we're selling to self-insured employers. And so we're worried that, like, you know, we can provide their SOC report and they're going to say that the specific controls you've implemented are insufficient.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I found it was a little bit more than just PII. Like, they kind of wanted control around any processes, anything that's going to go against data, but it was kind of a best like faith effort. And essentially the auditors come in and they just kind of poke at things and they're like, hey, all right, this thing, who made this change? And if you can show that, you know, very effectively, and you're like, here's our process, here's where it's tracked, and we did it, then you pass. But the external thing is hard. Yeah. Say it one more time.
Dylan, I was curious to ask what warehouse you're on.
That was on the AWS stack in Redshift.
Okay. So I only work with enterprise clients now. So basically think of all the nightmarish healthcare regulations and compliance. And a lot of the pieces that I often have to think about is what is access, and when you break apart so I often ask the question of, is it data or is it logic that you have to protect access from? So is it like, can your folks see the SQL? They just can't query off the data. That has helped a lot with like, what can people actually see in their DBT project, especially in terms of documentation. I specifically asked about data warehouses because I found there's definitely better approaches depending on which warehouse you're on. Like with Snowflake, one of the clients I worked with implemented dynamic data masking. So essentially what they did is they have a macro that just runs that will, instead of having to create a separate view that like essentially salt all the PII data,
to begin with and then changed, right?
Yep, exactly. So we, Sanjana actually worked on that project, which essentially created this PI macro that just like automatically creates a view that will generate, like will just automatically salt the necessary columns, which is really useful. And then, but you do end up creating a lot of extra objects in your data warehouse. But with Snowflake implementing dynamic data masking, what you can do is just from the permission side, then alter what that user sees, and it could just come back salted for you, so you're not creating multiple objects. What is
how does the
oh,
local
sorry.
development workflow work in that case? Like, does the analyst who's running the DBT project still need to have access to all the raw data, or is there a way to make it so they just have a more scope permission set?
Yeah, so essentially they have access to the raw data, but once they like try to read from the raw data, it salts it for them. So it's essentially automatically salting for it. So the person technically never sees the actual PI data, because you'll just see like a row that's
You can
salted.
but you can implement all the views, and when the views are run, they're run on the raw data to calculate all the different statistics. But then there's a layer on top of it that salts everything that's touched by the PI.
Exactly, and that's like in the staging layer. I've also seen a kind of more hacked up version of this with using BigQuery. Essentially, you have two projects, one being the PI data containing one that holds all of your staging models, and then one being your cleaned with all the transform models, so that folks only has, because DBT can connect to multiple DBT BigQuery projects, you can just have everyone live in the cleaned and then just like read from cleaned up like dirty data.
And you limit access on those. We did something similar where we encrypted PII, and it was basically just like I was the only person that knew that key, me and the server. And so like some of those PII fields were, for the rest of the development process, encrypted. We had to encrypt because we had to back it out later, versus hashing. But yeah, having something like that where only a few people have access to the raw data, but then you have some sort of key encryption, hashing that, and hashing could be a lookup table, right? So like another way to do that is you store the sensitive information somewhere else, and you only join that at report time.
I've been debating about whether or not it might be effective to have like a PI like fact table that you actually then like join back in on the BI layer. So essentially you just like clean everything up, and then like for those folks who need to work on the like actually utilize the PI data, what you would do like in Looker, you would just have a view and then just join it in.
And then that makes it really
that
explicit.
Also is logic.
Yeah, we like separate. We actually had a PII schema where we were doing this, where we were putting everything in and then did a schema access control. And so you could only join to that if you had that permission.
Yeah, we do something similar in our Hadoop cluster. We have a set of views that are only available. So those are the public views that kind of everybody has access to, and it has all the PII columns stripped out. And then only the analysts who need access to the raw data get access to it. So it's definitely a different permission. We also have, as it's a Cloudera cluster, so they have a product called Navigator, which also tracks all of the queries and everything like that, because we have to report out, who accessed certain records and things like that. I think somebody was earlier talking about the SOX compliance and code. And from our perspective, we just have to make sure that all of our change controls, like they're really concerned about your change controls, right? So like who has the ability to change code and what process do they have to go through, right? So I can go back and say, okay, if because you could have like queries, for example, that might impact the data that goes into your data science algorithms or things like that, right? So you have to be able to track, okay, I know exactly when this change happened, who made it, who approved it, who reviewed it, those things. It's really about those kind of change control processes.
There was also another little thing too with that, where we started going down the route of limited time access. So there are some tools out, I can't remember the names right now, where essentially like somebody needs to access that PII, and so they get a token that has an expiration time. And so it's part of the kind of change control is like, all right, so we gave a token, like there's somebody, a second person, like SOC is really concerned a lot about having checks and balances too. And so you have one person that's like, okay, I give you access, that's logged. And then you have access for some amount of time. And if they need access again, you get it again. But then that creates an audit trail and also a little bit of control around access.
I'm curious if there's anybody who's been on a data team or their data team long enough to have really had to figure out how to scale something. So has anybody been on how to scale your approach and instrumentation tooling for this kind of stuff? We talked a little bit about how different this can look when you're a data team of one versus a data team of many, many more, or a company of like 10 to 20. And then, you know, a couple of investment rounds later and there's 100 people. Is anything like that?
I went 3 to 9, but if somebody's got a bigger scaling factor, I think they should speak first.
So our technology solutions group is, I think, 400. Not everybody is accessing like our data lake, but they're all building applications and having data. We have a lot of different applications. So it definitely is a challenge if we have lots of different technologies, multiple clouds, multiple data centers. It gets really difficult to figure out, so you really get down to looking at what are your principles and what are the standards that we need to implement versus the individual, like here's how here's specifically the settings you need to do, because it's, the principles are what matter. So he's like, I need to be able to do auditing, and that principle or that requirement is going to be different depending on the technology you choose. So as you get bigger, you're going to need to have a set of principles. And so everybody needs to know what those principles are and why you need to do them. And that way, because as you scale out, everybody is going to have to buy into those principles and implement them on whatever data platform they're on.
What can you give us some examples of principles that you think would be communicable, or like? Sure.
So like an example is like all changes have to, all DML changes have to have an audit trail, right? So of some kind, right? So that would be, depending on how you implemented it. Let's say, for example, so SQL Server, I could do it in a kind of snapshot table where I have kind of like a type 2 dimension table. So that would maintain history. I could have a history table that I use a trigger and store history in. I could also have, the .NET, for example, if I'm using .NET log stuff, it's going to look different. I could also use like temporal tables, which come with a history table along with it. So there's definitely different ways to kind of attack the problem, right? But no matter what data platform you're using, you say, hey, the principle is you have to have all your DML changes logged, right? You have to have a process for how your code changes get out to the database. So if that's stored procs, if that's functions, if that's views, there has to be some process for how you deliver those changes to production.
And usually always like at least another set of eyes, right? Like part of that process is having one other person at least see what you're changing and approve it.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So that's, and that's what a kind of a SOX auditor would be looking for, is like, okay, can I, as a developer, just push out code to production without anybody else seeing it, right? That would be a violation. That would be something that they'd want to fix. So that's kind of an example. I mean, naming standards is another good example. Not that, naming standards are going to differ depending on the database platform. So it's just, you have to have a naming standard and you have to follow it, right? Things like that. That's kind of an example. Like we want to have good, having metadata, having a data model with description of what all the fields are, right? That could be in ER Studio, that could be in Accolade, that could be in Excel, wherever it might be, whatever makes most sense for that platform, but it has to be available for everybody.
Andrew, I bet that it would be valuable to us and others. I don't know if this actually exists, but essentially a blog post that goes through like, here are general principles that you follow. I think that would be pretty cool.
I will put that, I'll put it on my list.
I know we work a lot and think a lot about attribute-based access control and defining sort of a policy language for access control that's generic to the database. So like, PII should always be nulled, or like PII names should be hashed, or like having principles like that. And we definitely go into a lot of companies where that language just doesn't exist. And that's like the first big thing you have to tackle is like, okay, let's pick 15 attributes or 15 identifiers that we can use and like scan all of our tables against. And let's make it as small as possible. Because if you're going to pick like 150, attributes that you want to compare against, that's going to be a lot of work on everybody.
I want you to, Stephen, I want you to use that right now to actually transition to the people side of your 3-part. Because, all right, you come into a company, we're like, we got to figure out what this means. Like, how do you go about having those conversations, getting people in the room, getting buy-in on these different policies?
Yeah, I was about to say, the second we started talking about principle, it felt like a perfect time to start talking about people as well, for sure.
Sorry, I lost my mic. Yeah, so I think everyone is probably familiar with this problem, and I put together this diagram on the right just to kind of highlight 2 gaps that I really see in organizations. I definitely feel this at an organization of even just like 100 employees, where you've got your data team and you've got these different departments, and then the executive level is kind of saying, yeah, we're using data to do this or drive this decision, and yeah, we're using it ethically, and then you have legal and compliance teams who might look at the data team with some suspicion. They're trying to reduce business risk of having extraneous sensitive data. You've got an information technology team who's probably developing standards and norms of how to do things that might be at odds with like the agile data team cycle, or the new tool you want to implement, or what you want to do as an individual team. And then you have your lines of business who oftentimes the data teams might be nested in or like directly supporting with data products. And they have, their own objectives might be at odds with some of the requirements to minimize personal data or other, or other requirements of the company. So I think there's a gap, I highlight here just a gap in incentives laterally between, people who are on the line of business and really looking to maximize business value as fast as possible. And then legal and compliance teams who want standards, they want to be auditable, they want to be like, make sure everyone's in compliance. And then vertically, where you've got this gap in decision-making where, at the very highest level, we're all sort of, the word is escaping me. We all have to obey the law, right? So at the highest level, you've got the law, GDPR, CCPA, and HIPAA regulations that we have to abide by. But then at the very lowest level, you're making very, very tactical decisions about what am I going to do with this single table, and am I going to copy it, and who's going to get access to it, what scheme is it going to live in, and that's sometimes hard to translate.
I think one of the first questions that we came up with was who was making the decisions about how data should be protected. And my answer to that was, I never talk to the people who make those decisions. I only talk to the people who are tasked with creating the solution. And that's a very different experience. So it's really interesting to think about how far removed the people who are making these decisions are from the people who have to worry about things like, is this performant? What does my warehouse look like? Like, would I say, like, do the considerations that I've had to make conflict with what my idea of like a good like data stack or like how our kind of setup is?
Can I add an additional question?
Yeah.
My own standpoint, which is, what's the right way to do this? Because I'm in the fortunate position of like, I have ownership from the engineering side on both data and security and privacy, so the compliance aspects. So I'm kind of in the room in both categories as we think about getting our data program, our data team, and our security program like come to life. And so like, these are questions where I don't know what the right answer is, but I definitely think that there are a lot of wrong answers. And so I'd be curious to hear from the group, like, where have you seen this go poorly, and like, where have you seen it gone well, so that we can adopt your best practices rather than making the same mistakes?
I think a key aspect is with decision makers, like understanding the impacts, and let decision makers have they should have the responsibility. So as somebody who's on the ground implementing something, right? Like I can implement something where people have access. I could implement something where it's, you know, not as secure, and maybe even the project I'm working on requires PII to be used in a way that I don't agree with. That has to like be pushed up the line, and there's sort of there's an accountability piece where people are paid the big dollars and the responsibility to own the risk to the company, right? Like that's what an executive is supposed to be responsible for. And so what, like, trying to essentially offload a bit of that cognitive burden and be able to explain, like, here's the risk we're taking, is that okay, and get a sign off on that. Because there's not always the right answer. There's sometimes you take a risk and you're like, okay, yeah, I mean, you know, your security guys want the data deleted from the get-go. Like, you're never going to use that data, but the product guys want it to be used everywhere. And, you know, the truth is messy. And so the decision maker has to own that. And I think the way they own it should be transparent.
One concept we talk a lot about at our company is this trade-off between privacy and utility. And like, it's this spectrum that there is no right answer, but it is like, you know, the first thing some of our research scientists who think about like quantitative privacy risk is, they'll be like, well, what's your risk tolerance? You know, like, what are you willing to accept? And I think there's no right answer for that, but I think to Dylan's point, it's like being transparent and being organized enough to be able to be transparent about how, you know, sort of what your decisions are in any given stage is, you know, that's definitely, I would say, the starting point for any company. But then I think, you know, a lot of companies have a much higher bar.
So as far as like convincing, you know, stakeholders that this stuff is important, I mean, you know, for the most part, I mean, we don't really, you know, we're large enough, we have enough buy-in from people to realize that PII and security is important. But I mean, all you got to do is throw out there, you know, if we don't do this, what can happen, right? And there's examples of that, right? Of this happening to companies, whether it's a hack or you know, you don't have good data management, these are the things that could happen, right? And read this article and you see the name of that VP, that could be your name in there. Do you want that on your resume, right? You know, so there's always give and take too, right? So usually, you know, it's got to be a collaborative partnership. So if we're talking with legal or compliance, we're usually asking, okay, well, what's the goal that you're trying to get at, right? Versus, you know, okay, so you want us to be at this level of security or implement this security. Here's let's talk about how we could do that. here's an example, is this good enough, right? So you need to have that really healthy relationship with your security folks and your legal folks to, they have to know that you're going to try and do the right thing, right? But you also have to keep them in the loop too, right? So the worst thing that you can do is keep them out of the loop, because when that happens, if something does go wrong, you're going to want them on your side. So it's better to have their buy-in initially, to be like, hey, we talked about this. Here's the controls we decided to put in place. We all signed off on this, and so we're all in agreement that this is what we want to do.
Andrew, I agree with you on that take. I think a lot of the conversations I've had with other companies is like making sure you have that positive relationship, especially if you have an InfoSec team, just making sure that you're on the same page and you understand what the tool actually does as well. I found that just education and having an open dialogue of is this the priority versus something else? Because security teams often are very centric about block everything, but that can also hinder your development and also prevent you from being able to be as productive as possible. So I found having that open dialogue and just making sure they understand what are the risks you're taking, and also understanding with the modern stack, there's a lot of abilities to kind of hit undo, right? If you have a bad practitioner essentially accidentally deletes something, there are a lot of safeguards built in that you can just be able to recover. Just one of the key selling points of version control and just Git is the fact that you can just click Git blame and also just undo things. And I feel just making sure that they understand that those are in place has helped a lot of conversations that I've had with other companies, especially because I chat mostly with companies from 40 to 200, where the 200 team company thinks about compliance is their ultimate goal. That's their company motto. And just making sure that everyone's on the same page has helped a lot.
Matt, I'm curious if you have any, have you found any good resources or materials for starting to think through these questions for your own team?
Yeah, so the first step we took, the way we kind of started our process was me and one of our advisors, who was a co-founder, but now is just involved part-time. And so we started by talking to a bunch of peer companies in the healthcare space to kind of get a lay of the land of what this looks like. We got a sense of all right, if we want to go to market in Q2, we want to complete the SOC 2 type 1 audit by Q1. So that was kind of the goal we set. Then once we'd done that, then we figured out how we were going to do that. And the advice we got was to consider just to go with what's called a security assurance provider to manage our initial SOC 2, basically as kind of a stopgap measure, partially as a stopgap measure until we hire a CISO or a head of security and privacy. And so we looked at these two tools, Vanta and Tugboat, and ended up going with Tugboat because we thought they were a little more mature on the compliance side. And it's been great so far. They're really good at explaining the policies, explaining the controls, helping us understand what we do and don't need for SOC 2 type 1, and helping us get that over the line. And so they've signaled a high degree of confidence if you can get this type 1 done. I think we'll see. But then it's kind of once we do that in some form, and hopefully that isn't too tricky, where I think we're worried about the machine learning research and analytics workflows because they're a little non-standard compared to traditional enterprise SaaS business. But then I think the risk for us that we really see is once we actually get into those sales conversations, it becomes less about did we pass the SOC 2, which is more, as we understand it, it's are we operationally excellent? Are we implementing the controls that we said we were going to implement? And are the controls at a baseline reasonable? And it becomes more about the specific risks and threats that the security teams of our potential customers have around it. And that's where we think the CISO is important from a sales enablement standpoint. But then, you know, I'm kind of like, I have no clue what a lot of these more sophisticated enterprises are going to push for us to do in terms of security. So I'm worried, like one thing I'm worried is that like we won't be able to have PAI on laptops at all, which would totally disrupt all the workflows for our machine learning researchers who just want to use notebooks. And a lot of them come out of these PhD programs. They're not really good at anything related to DevOps. And so it's like, I got to figure that out. And so that's kind of where we're at. And the insurance provider has been helpful, but it's definitely this thing of like, I mean, even just being on this call and like realizing like the technical depth and nuance of a lot of these access controls just within the data warehouse of like, this is a massive undertaking, both from a compliance program standpoint and from an engineering standpoint in terms of getting all this stuff in place.
Yeah, I mean, I told you there were some other hurdles, but we took 2 years getting this like in place. We didn't have like some accelerator, like we didn't pay for an accelerator of like having an external company to help push us through, but it is a big undertaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, BD is a established company. So, I mean, it's not like it's a startup, right? So, I mean, a lot of this stuff has been in place for a long time. I mean, I haven't been involved in one, but I know that we do go, you know, we sell to hospitals, right? So, you know, we have devices that sit inside hospital networks. So, I mean, obviously hospitals are going to be very, very detailed about what they bring in. So, you know, depending on the level of, you know, who you're selling to and how complex they are, some of your clients are going to be, you know, or some of your clients are going to be more sophisticated than others. Some of them are going to want more details, right? Some of them will be like, hey, did you pass SOX compliant? Yep, here's my certificate. Yep, okay, good. You know, we're good to go, right? Some of them might just require more. And then you start building up that, you know, the first one is probably going to be pretty painful, you know, but after that, it's going to get, you know, simpler and simpler where it's like, okay, you know, my clients, all of the questions are going to be about, you know, the same, you know, so I already have here's all the documentation about, you know, our code path process, how we deploy changes, things like that.
You have good conversations with your sales team? Because like the sales team should really be the ones kind of figuring out lay of the land, what are different people asking for.
We still need to hire the sales team. So.
Gotcha.
Somebody's selling, right?
Hi guys.
Yeah.
My name's John. Sorry, I have some experience in this area. So I'm at a healthcare company in Canada. We are SOC 2 compliant. Matt, I'd love to chat. I can help you with some of this stuff and share some experience. Yeah, we have a lot of resources that we made for our sales team to sort of get in front of this stuff. You still get questionnaires, but there's a lot of the same answers come up and up. Yeah, sorry I wasn't able to participate more in the conversation today, but I'll follow up with you, Matt. I might be able to give you, at least you could share some stories. And it's interesting you mentioned Tugboat. We didn't use a tool like that. I wasn't aware of a tool like that. I'm actually looking to get something like that for as we continue our compliance program. I guess I did it the old-fashioned way. But I have heard good things about that tool, so I'd like to hear your experience with it. So
yeah, let's definitely connect.
Nice. Maybe on to just the last set of slides super quickly. I know there's a question there that I'd really love to get into.
Yeah, so the last question or the last topic I wanted to kind of bring up is it's great, you know, you can get up to, you know, compliant today, but then as we roll out new regulations like the CCPA, if you're in Europe, the GDPR, it's like you have to be able to revisit all these processes and map them to your new and map the new regulations to your existing processes or to your new processes. And so I think it's always an interesting question to think, to look at this the legislation and then think about how that maps to specific transformations or specific, statements. And I, as the data warehouse manager, I'm always thinking like, okay, well, like this is my tool at the bottom here, like grant select on tables, or, select null from a column. But, when a lot of the regulation is written in much more abstract terminology. GDPR talks about anonymizing data, but what does anonymized data look like? So there's really a lot of conversation to be had here around how these things actually get put into practice, and again, what is the right way?
I would love if anybody had any experience with the last question. Have you thought about ethical concerns beyond legal requirements at all?
I can comment here briefly. So one of the discussions we're having right now, we came up with a framework of like governance, risk, and compliance. And so risk and compliance are pretty easy. Risk we do through a standard threat assessment process. Compliance, it's just HIPAA, SOC 2, CCPA. But then there was this other aspect of governance. And so that's something where it's really difficult because like the stakeholder group is like a third of the company, because you have like all the clinical folks, you have the product managers, and then you have the whole security team. But the one way we've been thinking about it is in terms of, for us specifically, what are the risks that we externalize onto our patients and onto the doctors, where it's like really easy to stay focused on your bottom line. But I think a lot of the other aspect is about the bottom line of the other people you're interfacing with, and kind of taking that more stakeholdership view. And so that was a framework that I've been pushing recently, and that's been at least successful in terms of getting everyone to communicate within the same paradigm. I think that the rubber is going to meet the road, where we have to all align around a consistent assessment of like, what are the risks that our patients actually face? But at least that's been one way to concretize it for us.
I feel like I had an interesting one on the ethical when we got around to, and it's actually part of GDPR as well, the right to be forgotten, the right to, delete your data. And this is a hard transition, because I think, for a long time, we kind of approach it like data is, like historical data is solid, like it's never going to go anywhere. And as soon as you start deleting data, it gets into these weird realms where like, what happens if your biggest data source or some data source leaves, right? And you have to delete all that data. Like I got into conversations with our finance department where they're trying to look at number of users that we have. And, we're deleting users, we're deleting their data. And so like those number counts changed in the past. I'm like, how come we had 1,000 users last month and now we have 900 users last month? I'm like, well, we deleted users, right? Like deleting data. And it is a really interesting thing that I had to wrap my head around. A lot of what we ended up doing there, as like from the solutions side of it, is for things like user counts and things that we wanted to have high level, we fully anonymized it. So like disconnected tables, so you couldn't join back to tables, and just anonymized a random ID that we could count by, but you lose any idea of who that user was or what system they were connected to, so you can't track it back. But you still lose some information. And so trying to decide what links you keep and whether that is truly deleting the users. And then the other side of it for me, from the data science side, was I thought about, if I train a model that predicts history and forward, and somebody wants to delete part of that history, I should actually just retrain a model. Like I should just treat that as the new truth. So it's not actually like, history is not static. I'm just getting new inputs into my model. So I thought the right to be deleted was interesting.
So there's a couple of things that's, the right to be deleted is a little bit more nuanced, because, so for example, in the case of medical data, there's some additional requirements that, like for regulatory reasons, we have to store that data, because if something happens, right, to where there's a recall, right? Let's say a recall on a device or a medication or something, like you have to be able to identify who the patients were, right? From a legal perspective. So there's legal requirements around it. The other thing is, you know, for other things like your user counts and things like that, you should still be able to keep the aggregates of it, right? So you still know that there was a user. The fact that you don't know what their name is, that's a different story, right? So I think in some cases, and I'm not the expert, but in some cases, I believe you can leave the data there from a key perspective, but you just have to anonymize it, right? So you know that there was a user there, but you don't know, 100% where they live, what their name was, things like that. But you still know that there was a user there because one, that filters into potentially your financial reporting, right? So if you're reporting to the street how many users you have, that's important information and that can't change, right? So you still have to be able to say, well, what was my user count in, 2 years ago compared to my user count now, right? So that has to be accurate. So there's definitely nuance in kind of what, it's not like you just blow away all data associated to that user, right? Their activity, for example, you might still be able to save, but you just don't know whose it is, right? You know that they did something on your system, but you don't know who they are, right?
But that gets really tricky with anonymization, because if I can take one other piece of information, join it back together, and recreate who that user is,
sure,
then it's not anonymized.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, like I said, it's a complicated area, and you have to look at it. And it's always good. This is where you bring in experts, right? Who are, unfortunately, like sometimes lawyers are necessary, right? But that's where you get into some of those nuances and the details and things like that, because every kind of situations is different, and so you kind of have to go through and see, okay, what does forgetting a user mean for me and my system?
Should we? I mean, we're over time now, too.
Yeah,
that was a good. I think that was a good place to wrap up. That's a good comment.
Dylan, I love that you just jump in and like half moderate. It's great.
I mean, it's a group effort. Group effort.
I think Dylan has attended more of these than anyone except me, so he totally gets to.
Can you send me an honorary pin or something, Caitlin?
Yes.
I'll wear that.
You
get a red hat.
Swag.
We'll make red hats great again, and you can send me a red hat that says honorary moderator.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah. On that note, thank you all so much for coming, Stephen and Sanjana. Thank you for moderating this. This has been awesome. I didn't contribute because all I have are anti-patterns. So it was awesome to listen to what everyone else does.
Yeah. And Matt, if you start a thread, I think I know for myself, I'd love to comment and keep the conversation going like asynchronously. So
yeah, I'd appreciate that.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, guys.